So to get started, here's the drawing for today. Go ahead and pause. And to begin, we're going to start with the sky. I'm on a little bit of an angle, and I'm mixing up some French ultramarine with some of the mud in my tray to get it a little dirty. And I'm just going to paint around the sails and leave some holes for the clouds. And I'll use some of my dirty yellow for that kind of atmospheric cloud cover. And just painting in between shapes, not using any masking fluid. And I'm just going back and forth from that French ultramarine to the yellow mix. Loosely putting it in, letting one color touch the other. And I'll just pull that down to the horizon. So next I'm going to mix up some sand color, and it's mostly the blue and the orange, but I add yellow to it so that it will lighten a bit. And make sure you're using the French ultramarine, not the phthalo blue. You want the cool blue for this. So towards the top, I'm going to start with a sort of warmer mix, so it'll be a little heavier on the orange side. And I'm just cutting around my shapes, but you can see I'm starting way too dark here. So I'll just get this wash started with this dark mix, and then I'm going to add a ton of water to it to lighten it up. So you can see that big bead is forming at the end, and then I'm just kind of pulling it out at the side where it hits the water. And I'm just pulling all that color down, and I'll keep lightening that value. So I'm pulling it across and getting darker as I come down, and then I'm just keeping that edge where it hits the water really light. And I'll get the water to connect to that in a bit. But I'm keeping all of these directions in my strokes kind of pushing inwards towards our subject. We'll add more texture later to add emphasis to that and push you in even more. But we're doing kind of a warm to a darker sand in the front. And I'll toss in a couple extra darks just for some added texture. And push in a couple lines. Giving that a sense of motion. So I let that dry and decided it wasn't quite dark enough at the bottom, so I'm just glazing over it with another little mix of that darker sand. And it's just heavier on the French ultramarine to get that darker color. And I'll soften the edges so that you cannot tell that this was a second layer. Haven't painted in a while, so I'm a little rusty over here. You can spritz it, help blend those layers in together, and now it's all the good as one. And then I'm going to add a little glaze of orange back up into that corner where I lost a little bit, because I want that warm area to help push you into the subject. Now I'm going to mix up some French ultramarine, muddy it a little bit, and add some rose. So it's a little on the purple side, and that will be the far away water. So it's a cooler, more purple shade. And then I'm going to switch back and forth by mixing in some of the phthalo to have some of the warm blues coming through. And then back to some more of the French ultramarine. And back to the phthalo. And then I'm using that kind of light purple mix as the wet sand color. There's always that kind of periwinkle color where you get to the wet sand. And here I'm going to blend in little bits of the watercolor and then also the sand and tie it all in together. And I'm allowing it to break up and leave some little holes there in the front to get the foam for the water. And all these brush strokes and motions are pushing you into the subject. And soften that back area a little bit so it's not too heavy. And add that little bit of blue that peeks through under the sail. Now I'm mixing the French ultramarine with my yellow and dulling it down with a little bit more of the rose, so it's kind of a gray-green for that faraway tree color. And I've got my brush pretty dry, and I'm just going to use the side of it to sort of scrape on the trees in the background behind that little hut. And here I'm kind of carving out these shapes a little better, giving them some detail. And I'll also put a bit of land back on the horizon. So now I'm going to get this little hut going, and I'm going to put the shadow under the roof first, which is pretty close to the tone of those trees back there. It's not too dark. And then I'll use an even darker dark for the little window in there. And with some watered down gray, I'm just going to touch some light shading onto the face of that hut, because if it's too white, it will not look like it's far away. And then for these doors, I'll start really dark around the outside and a little softer inside them. And then here we got a very distant boat, so it's got a lot of shadow on it, on the siding. And just add some little shapes and marks to make details, or the illusion of details, I should say. So now I'm going to put in this boat that's laying on its side here. So I'm just filling the insides with kind of a warm gray. And then I'll get my dark for the edges. And here I'll drop on the shadows. And the really dark shadows for underneath the boat. Now here I'm adding to the little marks that are leading into the subject. And just using the very end of the brush to keep them nice and loose. And for the shading on these masks, I'm starting with the soft French ultramarine mix for like the cooler shadows. And then with the rose, I'll come in and add some touches of some warm shadows. And the same thing for the boat down here. And I'm just painting around these guys, in between them. And give the boat some shape with the shadow underneath. Add your little details. And put some shadows over here on this other larger mask. With the French ultramarine mix starting off for the cooler ones, and then add some rose for the warm. And I will fill in this foreground boat, or the front boat, in the same way. So I got the more blue side at the bottom and some of the rose towards the top, and then really dark underneath. So I'm just careful to leave little gaps for where their legs are. And add the shadow. And some little detail marks. I start with that warm red and then put some dark over it. And just kind of squiggle in some dark marks here and there. Now we gotta give some color to those background sails so they're not too white and bright. Make them grayed down and far away. And adjust their shapes so they're not so big. And now I'm going to put some of these cast shadows that are coming off of these guys standing here, falling onto the boat. And I'm going to add some more of these little squiggle marks that are pushing us into our subject. And sprinkle a little bit of dots on there for some texture. And then I'm going to just kind of lightly squiggle on the numbers and letters that are on the masts or on the sails here. And then the sail has got some letters and numbers on the other side that are kind of showing through, so they're lighter and backwards. Now I'm flinging up the masts. And now let's do our little people. So this guy is facing away, so I'll paint his hair. And just add some light shadows so that he has some arms and a body shape. And I will pull his red shorts right into his wet shirt and let it bleed together. And then this guy's got his shirt unbuttoned halfway down. And for his hat, I'm just putting a little bit of blue around the outside of the hat so that it's shaded behind it. There, now you can tell these two guys are standing there talking to each other. And he's also got red shorts. And I mixed my cadmium red with some of the orange and also some of the mud just so that kind of dulled down the color. It's not too obnoxious of a red. And then this guy is facing away from us. And he's got a little bit of shadow on the hat, on his body. also some red shorts. I just keep touching that red up a little bit as it dries to keep it bright enough. And then this leg is in the shadow, the other leg getting hit by the sun. I'm not really doing anything for their feet. I'll just give them some sort of shadows underneath. And then just a tiny bit of white gouache to put these little chimneys back on the roof. Add just some extra little details in there. And that's it.